Hi all, welcome to my research proposal. I hope you enjoy what I have prepared for you. The research question that I have come up with is group or individual cognitive behavioral therapy more effective in building emotional regulation skills in people with autism to help decrease behavioral challenges? When we think about this, we think about why does this even matter? Many of you likely know that people who are diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder do typically have some emotional regulation challenges, as well as behavioral challenges. So I really wanted to look a little bit closer at this, and some of the research that I have found suggests that cognitive behavioral therapy is a effective method for supporting people with autism. The specific concrete information that is presented through CBT is helpful to those with autism spectrum disorders as they work to reframe their thoughts and in turn decrease behavioral challenges. The hypothesis for my research is that it is likely that group-based therapies are more beneficial for people with autism spectrum disorders in working to increase emotional regulation skills because of the social context that is associated with a group-based therapy. These types of therapies provide real context to social situations that may cause frustration while in session, and that in turn allows for increased generalizability for skills. One of the articles that I found throughout my research suggested that peer-mediated interventions were used appropriately to model behavior. The students that were supported through this article and this research did very well with a peer model for appropriate social behavior. Because of this information that we have related to peer modeling and peer interventions, I've suggested through my hypothesis that a group-based therapy would be more beneficial for people with autism spectrum disorders than an individual-based therapy. The theories that have been the basis for this research proposal are social learning theory, cognitive behavioral theory, and systems theory. Social learning theory suggests that we learn from social situations, which directly ties into the peer-mediated interventions that I spoke about previously. Students with autism are often learning from others socially, even though this tends to be an area of struggle for these specific people. Cognitive behavioral theory ties into this research proposal because the therapy that would be used, or the specific intervention, is cognitive behavioral therapy. The theory behind this suggests that people are able to reframe their thoughts, which can in turn change their behavior. This is important for our people in this study because we are using this specific therapy, and it is also known to be effective for people with autism spectrum disorders. Finally, I've included a systems theory because this theory suggests that there are multiple layers involved in every person's current situation. And while we may be able to control certain aspects, there are other systems that may be affecting the person. In regards to this, I currently work in a school setting with students who have autism spectrum disorders. Some do not, some have mental health challenges. All of the students do have some type of behavioral challenge in their profile, which is why they're in the specific program that I work within. They also often have trauma or some other things that may be happening. They may be experiencing homelessness or they may have some family things happening. So this is why I've included systems theory, because to me, this is something that should be looked at anytime we are supporting anyone really in any way. We see certain things, but there's usually many more layers that we may not be aware of. So the actual research proposal is to compare group-based cognitive behavioral therapy along with individual cognitive behavioral therapy. The method that I would use to recruit participants would be a snowball method, simply because this is one of the easiest ways to get people who have similar life experiences or lifestyles happening. I suggested that, there would be a flyer maybe at the local developmental pediatrician's office, or in the area where I live, we have certain recreational areas that are focused towards people who do have an autism diagnosis. So maybe hanging some information there, or even going to some of the local educational centers for students specifically with autism. I noted that we would use quantitative as well as qualitative data points. The quantitative would be the specific data that suggests there's been an increase in behavioral challenges, a decrease in behavioral challenges, but that would really be those specific numbers. The qualitative data points would be the surveys that I would use. For the study, there would be 12 sessions each, where children would be randomly assigned to either group or individual therapies. The main qualifying situation for a person to participate in the study is that they would need to have an autism diagnosis. It would be important for them to have a midline cognitive range, because if somebody was non-speaking or potentially very cognitively impaired, it would be difficult to get accurate information. So once the groups are assigned for these therapies, the clinicians would start doing their therapies. They would continue with the same type of session with specific people. So if a person was assigned to a group therapy, they would receive group therapies for 12 sessions. If the person was assigned to individual, they would also receive individual for those specific 12 sessions. At the start of the research, there would be a questionnaire or a survey that would help us to understand behavioral challenges that the person is having. And then at the end of each session, that same questionnaire would be done to kind of determine whether or not these interventions are effective. At the very end, when all 12 sessions are completed, it would be important to tap into some other supports that are in place for the child to understand if they have seen a decrease in behavioral challenges. Ultimately, the idea is to increase the emotional regulation skills through the cognitive behavioral therapy, which would in turn decrease behavioral challenges such as yelling, screaming, acting out, tantrums, you name it. Some of the limitations that are associated with the research proposal are the sampling, which again is that snowball sample. This is typically considered not the best type of sample because the results are not always generalizable to the larger population. However, because of the type of research that would be happening, this does seem to be an appropriate method to gather participants. Another limitation would be that there could be additional interventions or things that are even happening in the person's life while the trial is going on or while the research is being conducted. So somebody could have a change in diet or a change in medication or begin receiving additional outside therapies, and this could really affect the data that's collected if the researcher does not know that these interventions are happening. Finally, another limitation is that the information is self-reported. So parents and the people with autism who are participating would be reporting on those surveys how their behavior has changed, or maybe it hasn't changed. But sometimes parents can have a little bit of bias to their children, so this may not be the most accurate information. One way to kind of curb that would be to have an observation done and specific data points collected through objective observation. I did want to point out for future research that it really would be helpful to have specific interventions that are widely used for students with autism. I found an article and it noted that there were over 30 different interventions through a variety of different studies that all seemed to be effective in supporting students with autism. However, if we're able to narrow down that number of interventions for specific concerns, it really would be effective to use the same practices, all over the country, or at least in the state, everyone is using the same practices. It just would be helpful to support people as they move or as they go from location to location. Maybe they're traveling. That way, we have specific, well-known, effective interventions. Here's a reference slide with some of those articles that I did mention throughout this presentation. Please feel free to comment with any questions that you may have. This topic is actually very near and dear to my heart because of the current position that I am in for my profession, and it's just something that I feel would be very valuable to those who are supporting people on the autism spectrum who do have significant behavioral challenges. Again, thanks so much for listening to my presentation, and feel free to let me know if you have any questions.